Hi, and welcome to InFocus. This is Jabbar Al-Obaidi. In this episode, we'll be talking about Black Lives Matter. With me in this conversation, Dr. Emily Field. She's a professor of English and the coordinator of African American Studies at Bridgewater State University. Emerald Lopez, departmental honorary English major, Latin Americans and Caribbean Studies and African American Studies, these two minors. And she is BSU class of 2020. Currently, she is the program director at Elevated Thought. Christabel Pa, BSU class of 2020. And Mary Ankama, BSU class of 2020, hold political science with a minor in psychology. Welcome to InFocus. Let's start with Dr. Emily Field about what today, June 19, 2020, mean in terms of Juneteenth. Emily, please.
Thank you. It's a great day to be here to talk about Black Lives Matter and to celebrate the work of Black alumni at Bridgewater State in trying to make that mantra of Black Lives Matter a reality on our campus. Juneteenth has history within African American history and culture, more so than as a political holiday. So on June 19th, 155 years ago in 1865, enslaved people in Galveston, Texas learned that they were technically free. They had been freed by the Emancipation Proclamation. And that was the day that became a day of celebration and joy for formerly enslaved people in Texas. And then it spread culturally and became a day of celebration, a day of freedom, a day of Black independence throughout the nation. And so it has more of a cultural meaning. It was not a day that had nothing politically in the law changed on that day, but it had became enormously significant culturally as a day of celebrating the end of slavery and African-American independence.
Is it well known for the public in the United States?
Yes, absolutely. I noticed that President Trump was making claims just today or yesterday that he has popularized Juneteenth and that, quote unquote, no one had heard of it until yesterday. And I'm willing to believe that he hadn't heard of it previously, but many other people had. And a quick Google search will reveal its history. There's a story in the New Yorker by Annette Gordon-Reed that people could look at. And she's a very famous Black woman historian, and she tells the story of celebrating Juneteenth as a child in Texas, and gives some other context. So there are plenty of places to look. There's also a posthumously published novel by Ralph Ellison called Juneteenth. So it's very well known, certainly in African American culture and beyond, and President Trump did not discover it.
Now, we know there is the problem with the racial profiling and also racism. We have so many terms: structural racism, systematic racism, systematic racism, and cultural racism. And of course, I think there are not one need, there are multi-needs for people to understand this issue. So what's exactly racism means to you? You can, we start with Dr. Emily Field, and then the three of you can jump in, please.
Sure. I think one of the most important things for people to understand, if this is a new topic for you, is that racism is not just individual acts of meanness. It's not just one person being mean or being biased or being prejudiced. Racism has been baked into the cake of American systems, including the legal system, the political system, the educational system, and our culture. So racism is multifaceted. It is not separate from America. It's not separate even from our Constitution. It's not separate from our Declaration of Independence. There was a portion on slavery in there that was edited out. So it's important to know that racism is been with us throughout our history, and it continues to infect these various areas of our lives. So it is true that racism can be personal hatred or personal bias, but it's also very important to recognize that racism infects many of our systems in various ways.
Mary?
I'll have to second what Dr. Field is saying. I think it's multi-layered in itself. We can't really just give a definition to racism because we can see in different aspects within our lives and within our systems. It's the oppression of the people. It's the oppression of individuals who want to, be able to do the same things as their counterparts, but are not able to because of the systems that are infringed on them. That's what racism means to me. But I believe Dr. Fields pretty much explained it fairly well.
Marilla, do you want to say something about it?
Yeah, I think what you were saying, the protests have really been uniting the country, and it's opening up dialogue for us to rapidly and meaningfully reconsider the roles of policing in our communities, and especially it's a call to really denounce and demand that we reject racism and we learn about it, especially anti-Blackness in the United States. And that police brutality is not just a problem of bad apple cops, but like you said, it's systemic. And that's why people are protesting, because it's not enough to just convict the one or two cops that are doing these racist acts, but it's the entire system that allows them to believe and behave in that manner. And that's why the country is uniting in affirming Black lives in America.
Indeed, and it seems that BSU alums, and the three of you are, you wrote a letter to the president of Bridgewater State University. What really make that letter important to you to share it with the first forum that addressed the issue of racism? Anyone can jump.
Of course, if I may go first, I believe the letter, it's important in itself because it's important for Bridgewater State to take a stand and not be neutral during these times. It's important for them to understand that while we are pushing this diversity and inclusion agenda, we do in fact have to stand with the individuals who are already present in the school and are suffering at the hands of systematic oppression and racism. The letter of demands is just the icing on the cake because we have had these issues beforehand, but for some reason they were being neglected. So during these very delicate times, we believe Bridgewater has in fact needs to take a stand in itself and start acting in solidarity with the students that are present, because it's one thing when you're just conversing about certain situation, it's another when you're actually implementing changes. So that's pretty much what the letter of demand does. We are asking Bridgewater to take an act on things that we believe is important and on things that they have showed us that's important to them. So,
as you know, there is a task force now, and the task force will create subcommittees to address this issue. And as you mentioned, Mary, of course, the power structure, and I think at least in BSU, is much easier to penetrate through because you can reach out to the president or vice presidents or those in the decision-making circle. But you still feel that wasn't enough during your term in Bridgewater State University?
I don't think so. And the reason why I say that is because I've been part of several different multicultural clubs. This is not the first time we pushed this agenda. We have tried times and times, but it's always been a conversation, never really an action. And for the first time, this is actually the first time we see Bridgewater doing something about it by putting out a task force. But I wish it didn't take the killing of a Black man yet again to get to this point, because we could have been done this. Like, it's not just an issue that happened today. This has been happening from time. We are asking Bridgewater to support its professors. We are asking Bridgewater to support its Black students. This is an issue that we have on a daily basis. So I believe Bridgewater could have handled it a little better, but I'm happy to see that the changes are being implemented right now.
Yeah. And
If I may jump in there for a moment,
yeah.
I agree with everything that Mary has been saying. And I think that one thing that's important to understand is the way that racism functions. A lot of people, especially white people, believe racism takes a conscious intention. And that isn't true. And a lot of people who work on anti-racist work, like Ibram Kendi, who's written a couple of popular books, explain that racism it can result even if that isn't the intention, and especially if it isn't the stated intention. So when you have structures that are resulting in unequal opportunities, in bad treatment, in lack of representation for Black students in particular, then those are racist structures, even if they are not intentionally so, or even if they don't look that way on paper. And so part of what the students are asking for is to address those structures and policies that have racist consequences, even if that isn't, the issue is not whether they were intended to be that way or whether they look that way, but how the experience is for Black students in particular on our campus. And if that experience is unequal, if that experience involves harassment, microaggression, lack of representation in faculty, then those are racist outcomes that need to be addressed.
Bao, you nodding your head. So what, you want to say something?
I was just going to say that, this is, as Mary was saying, an issue that has been happening since prior to us even probably being born, at BSU particularly. And change is something that does take time. And the important thing is, regardless of what inaction happened before, that they are receptive to the message that we're putting forward, that they are actually putting together a task force, and that actions are going to be taken to improve the lives of Black and brown students on campus.
Yeah. So what are the most, if you prioritize actions, what are the 3 actions that you would like to see a sense of immediacy or urgency to implement?
I think one of the main conversation points that we've had in our conversations with faculty and administration has just been increasing diversity in positions of power on campus, having more full-time Black professors, having more Black and female women, men. What am I trying to say? Okay, having more people of color in these positions in the administration that can speak from experience in a way that helps the students that are on campus, whose voices may not be heard because they're just here for 4 years and they might feel like they're just passing through to collect a degree. But the experiences that we have are valid. And what is going on is something that is, like you said, it's global. We are in a microcosm of something that is happening throughout the entire world. So it's important that we take a stance and that we actually use this as a platform to jump off.
Amaryllis, do you agree?
Yeah, I think for us, the letter really started because BSU has been able to comment on issues of racism and discrimination in a public sense, and they're able to denounce and recognize racism and bigotry in the world, but we feel like they are not being accountable for the culture of racism and bigotry that lives on campus, and that's really what the demands are fighting for. And I agree with Christabel. It's not enough to just hire a person of color to be the director of diversity and inclusion, or a queer person to be the director of the Pride Center. We really need to implement those values in all hiring processes and practices. And if we truly value diversity, whether it is gender diversity or racial diversity, or sexual orientation diversity, we really need to implement that and think and constantly reflect on, like, okay, who's missing here? Who haven't we given opportunities to? Who really needs to do the work, and maybe they're not a part of the BSU community anymore. And that shift really needs to happen. And I think for us, the letter of demands is really being transparent about how all of us, no matter if you're a person of color, we all need to do work to be anti-racist and to make sure that we're standing in solidarity, and that we're contributing to a culture that appreciates all of the differences that academia brings together. And I think for me, it starts with demanding that the BSU Police Department be disarmed, as well as their presence reduced on campus. I think for me personally, I have felt targeted and my presence questioned on campus, as somebody who's a leader on campus, who pays to be at campus, who wants to learn, and has made my home at BSU. Those are little micro and macroaggressions that happen on campus, as well as how we're interacting and establishing BSU community abroad on our service learning trips, representing on panels in undergraduate research, and just making sure that we are being very conscious and aware about how our upbringing and history and culture in the United States affects us all, and especially people who are abroad, whose cultures and nations have been intervened and influenced and colonized by our Eurocentric values as a country.
Emily, do you see the change start with in the academia in general, with curriculum, teaching, content oriented toward these issues that we've been talking about? Yes.
Sorry for interrupting. I think we need to work on every front at once. This is work, as Amaryllis was just saying, that is everyone's work, and that everybody at BSU, and I do see this happening in lots of, I've been having dozens of conversations with people, some of them agenda items that I've been trying to push for a long time. All of a sudden, people are receptive. So now is a moment to seize when people are starting to really understand. This has to happen at the level of staff and staffing. It has to happen in the curriculum. It has to happen in the residence halls, has to happen in the campus police. So there's room for all to work on this. This anti-racist work is the work of many hands, and people who were involved in the great movements of the past, like the civil rights movement, will tell you, and historians of the civil rights movement, for example, will tell you there were many people working behind the scenes in many different areas, not just one leader in Martin Luther King, for example, but many people doing many kinds of work. So at BSU, I think curriculum is very important. I think also faculty training and student training in a way is very important, because Bridgewater is about 25% students of color, 75% white or so. It's a predominantly white institution, as most institutions are in the Northeast. White people have been taught a culture that is imbued with racism, again, not always the kind of intentional, explicit kind of racism, and that is reflected in their behavior in the residence halls, in classes, and that extends to professors as well. So there's a lot of work to be done, and there are a lot of people willing to do that work.
Yeah, so we started with acknowledgement, so at least now this issue has been acknowledged. I mean, nationwide, and I'm not talking about a campus or campuses, but in general, it's, and globally, I will insist, I will argue that globally being acknowledged. The evidence that resources has been kind of shifted a little bit, at least in the mind now, which is one stage. And also a lot of, I'm reading established equity goals. I think that what you've been talking about, this is really addressing the establishing of equity goals. So we have equal goals. Now, I think the question is, and I wanted, this is just a brief answer to any of you, about the interpretation of the funding police. As you know, I mean, all of us, if something happened, we will go 911 and call the police, and they come on and help. But what's your understanding to police defunding? Is it abolishing, or is it programming, reprogramming, or is it retraining, or is community engagement? I just would like to hear a brief answer, and any of you can jump.
Yeah, I think all of us hold different but very similar views about policing in communities. But I guess starting off with that, crime isn't random. Usually crime happens when someone's basic needs are unmet. So if we invest in educational opportunities in community-based organizations, centers, mental health resources, and really critical community needs, that is proven to be much more effective than investing in police systems. Especially the funding that police currently have, it's really enabling and militarizing the police in communities. And so defunding the police is essentially a long transition process that doesn't happen overnight, but the change starts with reallocating this funding and investing, again, in community-based public safety, including non-carceral violence prevention, as well as intervention programs and skill-based education, which has a lot to do with consent and boundaries and cultural competency and just overall developing healthy relationships and healthcare infrastructure that is really about overall wellness and investing in care instead of cops.
So it's nice. This is a nice phrase. The developing healthy relations. It's really, this is, I think, go across the board. Developing healthy relations among us as people, between us, community, and policing, police, other entities is important. So now I want to go back to at least what I believe that's important. Emily, you started the minors on campus of Bridgewater State University and attracted a lot of students because they were hungry for studying the history and the culture and legal issues, racial issues, cultural issues. Don't you think it's now about time to actually elevate this minor to a major? Then we can attract more students, not just on campus, but in Massachusetts and probably even abroad.
Yes, I do. So just to give a little institutional history, the African American Studies minor went online, became available for students to declare in the spring of 2018, in January of 2018. Since then, about 62 students have signed up for the minor. As you say, there was a hunger for this. There are a couple things that need to be, I'm all for a major. I was a double major myself in English and African American Studies when I was in college, and my African American Studies classes were some of the most formative intellectual and personal experiences that I've ever had, and I see that happening in the classroom with students of all backgrounds who take African American Studies classes. And if anyone wondered whether the discipline were still relevant, it's exactly the field that we need to be investing in to both understand what's going on in the world and also to effect positive change in terms of anti-racist work. So it's absolutely crucial, I think, for the minor to be elevated. Institutionally, we're going to need support, which means money. We're going to need faculty who are dedicated to African American Studies and who are expert in African American Studies. We have a few faculty on campus and definitely pockets, but we will need tenure lines. We will need support to be able to hire people. I'd love to hire, there's no one on the faculty who has a PhD in African American Studies, for example. So I would love to provide those institutional structures so that we can have a robust functioning major and perhaps even a department. One problem that's often happened with interdisciplinary fields like this is that you often have no real home or department, so faculty are spread everywhere, and that means that once again, often faculty of color are being burdened with both being English faculty and having to attend all those meetings and African American Studies. So we need to think carefully about the structure so that we're allowing it to grow and not unnecessarily burdening people, especially faculty of color who have enough on their plates.
Is the idea it's about time to actually accomplish?
Personally, it's been time. Like, it's been time. And as Dr. Field said, it doesn't just go back to the study itself, but it's also supporting the faculty that does the job. If we don't have the faculty that does the job, we're not able to elevate this major in the first place. That's why we included in the letter of demand more support for Black professors, because it's important for us to have somebody that looks like us teaching these kind of classes. It's important to have it's important for white students to see somebody that is that spent their time studying African American studies, telling them why we are amplifying the study in itself, why it's important to learn about it, even though it's not part of their culture. The reason why we're having these issues right now is because it's not implemented within our education. America does not necessarily feel as if it's important to talk about the history of Black people. So now we have biased understanding of our history. And that's why we have these issues, because people don't understand why we're taking these stands. When in reality, we have been taking these stands for years, for centuries now. And the change should have been happening. It should have been happening.
Okay, I have, yes, go ahead.
Mary made a good point that Black history is American history, that African American history is American history. And so we're all in great support of making this minor into a major at BSU. But I think it's also important that those who choose not to choose this as their major or minor still get education on Black culture, still get education on Black history, just to make them a more robust and round individual when it comes to going into the job sector, or whether these students decide to one day become professors themselves, health professionals themselves, legislators themselves, who knows? It's our job as a university to give them the foundation and the framework to go out into the world and become professionals. And you cannot be a professional that deals with people of color without knowing about the history of these people you're serving. And that's an important part.
And any thoughts about next steps?
So next steps, I think there's a lot of work to be done across the board. The task force will get started, but professors are also really working on how can they do anti-racist work in their classes. And I know many offices around campus are thinking the same, and the four of us and many more people you don't see here are out there helping to educate them on how they might do that.
Okay, anyone in 30 seconds?
I think for me, we can all start by decolonizing all of the courses on campus. And I think in general, as people, just leaning into that discomfort that we're all feeling, because when you're uncomfortable, that is the best possible time for you to learn. So whether that's your views on police defunding, abolition, police brutality, or learning about the history of people of color and of Black people and of anti-Blackness, lean into that and discover and learn and challenge yourself and your families and communities.
Thank you. Anyone else, the last 30 seconds?
I just would like to say, it all starts with a book. It all starts with a book. Pick one up in regards to African American studies, pick one up in regards to systematic oppression.
Okay.
A great I would say a great book to start with is The New Jim Crow by Alexander Hamilton. Just educate yourself on matters that don't necessarily matter to you or don't necessarily affect you on a daily basis, because at the end of the day—
With that note, thank you so much for joining InFocus, and thank you for watching InFocus. Bye.